you talked about interest rates, where they're going to go a year ago or 9 months ago when we met. How right have you been in your predictions?
Dude, I love I don't want to brag, but I think I was the only person that said rates were not going to be dropping at the end of the year. That rates were not going to be going in.
I was saying they were. Most people were.
Everybody
or
was.
Q1 at least.
To be fair, everybody, and I remember, November, December, everybody, there was an article that got posted that went live. It was like, ING says there's going to be 5 interest rate cuts beginning of the year. And people were sending it to me and they're like, haha, you're right. You were wrong, loser. Like, this is all going to, and I went live right away and said, hey, like, just because this article is saying it, the way that social media and all of us work, we all share what we want to hear. We share news without even knowing the source. And I was like, hey guys, go look at the source. And then maybe you're going to question that a little bit. And what I try to tell people with my predictions is, I got no dog in the fight. Right? There's no, like, so why would ING say that? Well, they sell stocks and bonds and mutual and funds. And so, like, of course they want them to go down. And why would so many agents be sharing it? Because life would be way easier for everybody in real estate. It hurts me and hurts my businesses that rates have stayed high. But so I said they were not going to get dropped. I said there was even a chance they were going to raise. And like, it seems like every quarter, my prediction gets more and more accurate. Every time the Fed meets now, they went from like, hey, instead of doing a bunch of drops, we're going to do 3. And then they said 2. And then at the last meeting, they said, well, if we have to end up raising them, we will.
Did they? I didn't hear that.
Yeah. So so now the chances of them, now like the stock belief is there's maybe a 25% chance that they're going to get raised before the end of the year. But 2 months ago, the same people would have said there was a 0% chance. So it's what I tried to tell people last time and tell people right now is like, this is the new normal, which is okay. Mm-hmm. This was the new normal that they did all through the 80s. And it even after the housing market crashed, 2009, 2010, they didn't drop rates super significantly, and it was tough because there was a recession. They did other things to try to stimulate the real estate market. That's an assumption people make,
though. Rates went to 0 after 08, 09.
Oh, yeah.
That didn't happen.
No, it didn't. Like, they got dropped some, but I posted a chart yesterday that kind of showed that they dropped a little bit, but like
5-ish? Right?
Yeah, 5-ish.
Right.
They were in the 5s, slightly lower than they are now, but that was the stimulus that was done after the biggest housing market crash ever.
Yeah.
Right? So I try to tell people, like, hey, no matter what, run your business and plan your business as if nothing's going to change. So if you're a real estate investor or you're a real estate agent or any of that stuff, especially when it just comes to rates, like, don't say, hey, when rates come down, this deal's going to change, just whatever else. I think the advice I gave last time too was like, lock rates for the next 2 to 3 years if you can at today's rate. Because if it turns out better, you're in good news. Like, if you work your real estate business as if rates aren't going to come down, so you got to work extra hard. If they drop, it's all good news. But if not, you've pivoted in a way that's there. And there's a lot of other big changes. But so far, when it came to that one, I was spot on so far. We'll see if by the end of the year.
Well, what's your prediction?
How that's going to go?
What is the if you had to put money on it, what's it going to do by the end of the year?
Yeah. So I think the Fed rate will be exactly the same at the end of the year that it is right now.
And what does that do? Does that just, I mean, let me ask this question. So commercial real estate, and we're going to get into a bank failure that just happened, right? So commercial real estate, I believe, is the one thing suffering most. Tell me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah.
From higher interest rates or the fact that interest rates are up and they're going to stay up. I mean, unless they came plummeting down, nothing's going to save what's happening right now or what will happen over the next 6, 8, 9 months in commercial real estate. Loans coming due.
Yep.
People operators needing to file for foreclosure, give the property back, sell at a steep discount. You're going to see commercial pricing come down. It already is coming down.
Yeah.
So what was my question? My point was that we're seeing this baked in. We're going to talk about the bank failure here in a moment. But what does it mean? Are we already priced in? Are like you're seeing, record stock prices at this point? Are we kind of already priced in for whatever eventual drop there is? Like, is this as good as it's going to get, or is it going to get worse? What is it going to look like over the next?
That's a great question. And there is a difference between like what the Fed interest rate is and what the interest rate is somebody pays for their house.
Sure.
But they're correlated.
They're correlated, yeah.
Right? You could have mortgage rates go down a quarter point 1 week based on other news, based on different investors in the market, different lenders in the market, things like that, even if the Fed rate doesn't go. And there were times that people were like, no, you're wrong already. Rates just dropped a quarter point and then now they're back up. And there's a lot of, but they're correlated. So they're not the same. But if the Fed rate keeps going up, mortgage rates, real estate 30-year mortgage are going to keep going up. But investment loans are different. And investment loans are now the way they impact, if I'm going to go build out a residential single family home neighborhood and sell houses, that Fed rate impacts the rate that I'm paying to the bank directly. That's a direct correlation. Whatever lending rate you're going to get from a bank to do a development is going to be related to the Fed fund rate. So that's going to be a direct correlation. If that goes up, your cost of money to become an investor goes up. Commercial is the same. Commercial is tied to that Fed funds rate. But the bigger thing that's tied to, and so commercial meaning even multifamily. So multifamily, office, storage, anything like that, industrial. The bigger part is cap rates. I know we talked about it a little bit last time too. So cap rates are essentially the way you value commercial property. And in theory, it's saying if you've got $1 million, if the higher the Fed funds rate is, the higher the free money is. So if you've got $1 million right now, you could put it in a CD and get 5.5% back on your money. So maybe 6% back on your money, risk-free. You can cash it out whenever you want. That's a really high return. It's the highest we've seen since the 80s, since early 80s, right? So they're saying the cap rate used to say, if someone's going to buy a building for $1 million, what should their return be? So when interest rates, when you could go put it in a savings account and only get 1% back, it was like, okay, well then you can make then buying a building and making 5% to 6% return. That's a good return. Yeah. That's a good return because commercial is kind of risk-free was the thought of that. Well, now if you can make 5% without risk and cash out your money whenever, then you're going to have to get more than that in order to want to invest in commercial real estate. Now you need to 7 or 8%. Well, the cap rate becomes 7 or 8%. And so all that means is if they're going to go appraise a property, they're saying, what does it make right now? So $1 million property would have to be making $70,000 a year on a 7 cap. If it's only making $50,000 a year, it's going to be worth like $800,000. Whereas a year ago, that same return would have been worth $1 million. So even if the property is doing the same performing, so now value properties go down the cap rates when people are trying to go refinance, when people are trying to even just refinance based on like not even getting good interest rates, right? Yeah. But just saying, hey, we need it to appraise at what we owe on it. Commercial is down 30% at least in the last 18 months just on cap rates. And then people that we've started to see a lot of like syndicators starting to get foreclosed on. We've seen a lot of stuff like in some of our online communities that we see of people that were raising money for things that were hoping to get a refinance by now. They didn't necessarily do anything wrong. Yeah. But except for they got short-term debt thinking they'd be able to refinance, and now it won't appraise for what their current debt is.
The merry-go-round ended. Yeah.
So the merry-go-round ended, and I don't necessarily think they were doing what everybody else was doing. So it's not, there are a couple bad actors in the space, but mostly there was good actors that are getting caught. Same thing happened in the 80s though. One of my oldest mentors, Arnold, amazing man, and that's where I get a lot of my info and probably a lot of my predictions too. Was he talked about, way back then, he said, in the early 80s, the Fed saved the world and crushed real estate investors, right? But saved the world. Yeah. And he was a real estate investor at the time. He lost major projects, and a lot of people did. And he's like, but otherwise but they saved inflation. It was like, they did the right thing, but the real estate investing, commercial arm especially, is who suffers the most. And that's how it is today.
So today, if you're going to finance a commercial property, like the thing you're talking about, like a bridge loan is what got some of these operators into trouble, or is getting some of these operators into trouble. Is it the right type of debt to get now, though?
I got my storage unit loan in 2021, and I remember at the time it was like, this is how it's locked for the next couple years. And then after that, if you don't refi, it's going to move up to a ceiling. Man, thank God that ceiling was 5 3/4 points. And I remember at the time we're like, oh man, we do not want this thing if it's 5 3/4 points. And in hindsight, that ceiling was great. And so if you go get a loan today, you're probably going to get a similar construction loan that's going to say, hey, here's your construction loan for this new project. You're going to be locked in at like 7% right now. And if you don't refinance the next few years, your ceiling is going to be locked in at that 9%. The best advice I could give any investors is pro forma based on that ceiling rate that you're going to get. Yeah. And if you can perform at that ceiling rate that you're going to get, then do the deal, because there is a good chance in the next 5 to 10 years that you're going to be able to refinance at something different. The ceiling rates used to be things that people were never really never expected were going to happen. And then a lot of people got loans without the ceiling rates. The people that got the 12% loans. And I would say don't do anything that's like a really hard money type 12 to 14 right now based on a refi.
You say 5 to 10. So do you not see rates coming down for a year, 2 years?
Yeah, I think that they will.
It's new normal.
Yeah, so the new normal. So I guess one of your other questions was, is it priced in? And I'll hit that, and I'll go to like what I think are going to happen with the rates. So when that announcement happened in like December from that article, and then in January when when the current guy Volcker was the 80s guy.
Powell?
When Powell said, so they
like who the hell's Volcker?
Now Volcker was the Fed chairman in the 80s, and he's Powell's idol.
Got it.
Right. So that's also why we knew Powell was going to do like he writes books about him and stuff. So when Powell said, hey, when he actually said out loud, we're going to lower rates, the stock market went crazy.
Right.
At that point, At that point, they priced in the cuts. Now, the last couple of months, every time there's a Fed announcement, the stock market has come down a little bit. I think now they have priced in the idea that there might not be any cuts this year. I think if we get to the end of the year and there isn't any cuts, stocks will be down just a little bit. But I think they've already priced that correction. What I really wish they would do.
The key to life, it isn't money. It's happiness. And when you measure how happy you are, you actually become even more happy. Our friends at GoBundance, the Tribe of Millionaires, use a very specific tool to measure their happiness. It's called the Life Happiness Index, and you can have it too. Go over to GoBundance.com/LHI and take your Life Happiness Index assessment. You'll rate yourself in multiple categories on exactly how happy you are and get a custom output for you specifically that you can use in developing whatever goals you have for your life. GoBundance is the tribe of healthy, wealthy, generous people who choose to live epic lives. And the tool GoBundance members use at the base of all of that is the Life Happiness Index. Get out there and grab life big.
Is just say, hey, we're not going to make any cuts for a while.
Yeah.
Because I think if they did that, the market would tear. I think people would come back to the market. I think people would start buying. Like, buyers just don't want to buy if they think next month the price is going to go down. If they just said, hey, this is the new normal, people could get used to it. People can get used to the new rates.
Why is he saying it then?
Man, I don't know. Like, when that was our biggest thing that we said on our podcast back when he did, I said that was a huge mistake to tell people that.
Yeah.
Because then the problem was he said, I'm going to lower rates. Well, then the market went on a tear and people started spending money again and inflation went heavy again.
Yeah.
So he shouldn't be doing his playbook. He should just say, hey, nothing's going to happen. This is the way it is. And then let the economy do its thing. Because by him saying he was going to lower it, then inflation got worse because people started spending money and then he couldn't lower it anymore.
Is there a correlation to election year?
I think so. Now, the Fed chairman is one of the people that can't be replaced.
Sure.
But they can be influenced, right? There's other things that here's an example, right? So in theory, you can't fire the Fed chair, right? President has no power over that. But the Fed could come to them and say, hey, I think that there's some other things that we could do to stimulate real estate without affecting the economy. We can bring back first-time home buyer tax credits that we did in 2009, 2010. We could stimulate, housing by doing this and this, but offset it this way. So he can have ideas that he can bring to the government, and the president can say, well, we aren't going to do that because you're not playing ball over here, right? So I think the correlation to election years is if there's other things that he thinks are good recommendations that do require the president or Congress to vote on, that's when they can push a little bit of that back and go, well, if we're not going to do this program that you believe in unless you tell people rates are going down.
Does this election matter in terms of economic prosperity over the next 4 years?
Man,
loading it up for you,
dude. It's great. I think the election will probably impact. I think if Trump gets elected,
that's the question. What happens if Trump? What happens
if Trump gets elected? I think economy goes on a tear. I think there's extra incentives that come into the real estate market because he's a real estate guy. And he's a real estate guy by heart. That's how he grew up. That's what he knows. And I think he can see that real estate sector has been impacted at a more dramatic level than any other sector. So I think he could probably come up with some smart ways to offset that. They could re-extend capital gains stuff. They could increase the amount that you could do on accelerated depreciation again, because that's something that's been reduced recently. Like, one of the advantages to buying commercial was you could buy a building for $10 million and get a $3 million write-off. That year.
Yeah.
And now it's reduced to you can get a $1.5 to $2 million write-off. Well, nobody wants to buy commercial right now. So how could you stimulate that? You can go, hey, go buy commercial, and now you can do a $3 million.
Is that being I saw something. Is that being reproposed? 100% bonus?
Yeah, it's all being proposed right now. And the chance of it getting done before the end of the year, I think, are low. But there's lots of incentives that could happen. So I think if Trump gets elected, I think it really helps the commercial real estate in investment business. I think it really helps real estate in general. And who knows what to believe in polls anymore or what's going to happen. I also just think that, not much stuff happens politically at the end of the year other than that election type stuff. Yeah. I don't see any way that he doesn't get elected.
Me neither.
But there's definitely some conspiracy theories of who might come in instead of Biden.
Sure.
At the last minute. So I think the election's really, really important. But I think it's kind of predictable at this point. So we'll wait to see what happens. So I do think, what does that really mean? So our interest rate's going to go down next year. I don't think they're going to happen. I don't think anything's going to happen until the end of the year. I think I think no matter what, when the election year is over, stuff starts to move again. I think Powell probably becomes more comfortable with saying what he thinks he's going to do with rates, and whatever he is going to do, if he lets that prediction out, then people know what to expect. They'll act on it. I think before he said it prematurely, which, man, will rates get lowered next year? Not if the economy takes off on fire. They're just going to make this
right.
They make this the way it is. There's no reason that they can't have the rates be like this for the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. Sucks for real estate, for commercial real estate investors that invested in the last 2 years.
It sucks for commercial so that's probably why they do it, because it sucks for them, but it's great for everybody else.
Yeah.
And like the idea of like even home buyers are like, oh, I have to pay 7% now instead. So it's like, okay, so the house you can buy is a little bit smaller, but the prices will adjust. And like we're adjusting new construction stuff to try to bring in houses at a lower price just to make up for that. So the rest of the market will adjust to where a first time home buyer will be able to buy a home again. That's respectable.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if they're paying my first, I guess I'm freaking old. My first house loan was in the 7s.
6.5 for me.
Right.
People were running to the bank to refi.
And I rember refiing at 5.5, thinking it was amazing.
Yep.
And then I also remember March, 13th, buying a house at like a 4% rate, and a year later being able to cash out refi at like 3, maybe 2.8% on my jumbo loan.
Yeah.
I'll never be able to sell that house.
Yep.
Because that's the biggest jumbo loan I could have ever imagined having. So they change all the time.
Yeah.
And I think people just haven't remembered that. I mean, it is a big shock. It's a big shock.
Sure. It's interesting. Your take on it's a great take. Essentially what I'm hearing is there's some predictability in like, looks like Trump will win absent, being assassinated or something crazy.
Yeah.
Looks like Trump will win. We kind of know what the market will do if he wins. We kind of know what his posture would be if he wins around, commercial real estate, the accelerated depreciation. So it's almost like you can project forward the next 8 to 12 months of what will be for commercial real estate in particular.
Yeah.
That's crazy. On regular housing, residential housing, it seems on fire. Like I talk to realtors like, wow, but I'm in Charleston. It's really hot. I'm like, dude, in Michigan, it's really hot. Is there any end in sight? Even rates are up. I think buyers coming into the market are just kind of used to that being the rate. Is there any end in sight to the heat in the retail residential space right now?
Yeah, as far as like pricing just continuing to increase.
Yeah.
We've seen decreases in some markets where they had huge gains during COVID. Austin,
decreases, Texas, or kind of like cutting off the top and getting like so. If the increases are a bit artificial over the last couple of years, right? Like some of the increases are because people were paying 100, 200, 300 over asking. So are they coming back to what people thought they could get?
It's such a great, so your understanding of it is great, because if you I wish I could just pull up one of my charts behind me, because you would show like housing prices over time, like going like this, and then you would see this giant spike, right? And this drop that you could probably if you just took that chart over time that's been linear and you casted that out, that's what it should always be forever till the end of time.
Yep.
Right. And so anytime you go above that, you should expect it to get down to that. I think we are back down to that in a lot of markets.
To the trend.
Yeah. There are a few markets that have stayed above that trend.
Yep.
And I don't see anything that's going to change it. I think just the way that assets work and inflation works, like we're always going to have inflation no matter what, which always means that whatever the house is worth today, it's going to be worth more than that in 20 years. So I think we're always going to have, increases, certain, property increases every year are what's expected. It's what's healthy. It's what encourages people to be in it. I think there are, so what's going to bring home prices down, right? What could possibly bring prices down to where they're slightly more affordable, or so it's not as crazy, or things like that. There's a couple of things that I think will change that. One is I think there probably will be some first-time buyer incentives that they're going to reintroduce they had before that should just stimulate the market. Maybe a $15,000 tax credit for someone buying their first or second home. That's what they did back.
Why would that bring prices down though?
Because it would.
Wouldn't that create more demand?
So you're right. So it creates more demand on, I guess, the stability for people to wanting to be able to buy in some of the markets. But if I was thinking about, so you're right. So that's like an opposite thing that will actually just bring, it'll help make it more affordable. There's two challenges. First time home buyers can't compete and buy a house.
Yep.
Right. What can make that more affordable? It's if their down payment essentially gets refunded through taxes.
Yep.
So for the little guy, it doesn't necessarily affect prices, but it makes it more affordable because it makes it to where they don't have to come up with their down payment. So now they can afford to buy the house. So I guess there's two challenges. One is affordability for buyers. That would make it to where the average person can now buy a house where today they can't. And then the other thing that'll happen is just technology. So there is so much new technology that is getting introduced that we're going heavy in right now, which is these ways to build houses at much, much cheaper. And also adjustments like, why have home builders survived since the beginning of time, right? So home builders get caught with their hand in the cookie jar, every once in a while. In 2006, 2007, we had way overbuilt neighborhoods. We got our hand caught in the cookie jar. In 2022 is the same thing. But what builders do is builders are big enough. They sell their inventory and they start again. And so an example of what happens in a community is there's a 2,000 square foot house that was selling for $600,000. Housing market crashes. They got to sell all of their stuff or corrects. Now they have to sell all their stuff for $400,000. $400,000 is the price point in the neighborhood. They clear out their inventory. Now what do? They build a new product that's a $400,000 house, and they make it slightly smaller, and they lower the construction quality, and they lower the spec levels. But now they're able to build a house for $300,000 instead of $400,000, and so they're able to make the stuff more affordable by changing the spec. What we're going to see is more retail investors, small-time investors, little subdivision stuff, and that's like the thing that we're focusing on right now is how can you build a more affordable house by changing how big the house is, how big the yard is, what the amenities are, and then what the cost of construction is. Austin just made it to where you can put 3 houses on a lot instead of 2.
Yeah, but can you keep up? How much demand? How far behind are we, new construction to demand for housing? Like, how many more houses need to be built nationwide?
Yeah.
In order for supply to reach demand.
It's funny. Like if you look at a stat from like last week, right? They're saying we're 6 million houses short.
Yeah.
So 6 million houses short on demand. There's also 15 million vacant houses that nobody's living in. That's a weird combination of stat.
Why is that?
And so there's 2 things. So is there a shortage of housing, or is there a shortage of housing that people want?
Yeah.
Right? Or is there a shortage of housing that people think they deserve? Right? Like my first house wasn't nice. My first apartment I rented wasn't very nice, but it was livable.
Same.
Right?
Yeah.
But I also imagine that there's a lot of people that are the age I was then that wouldn't live in the place that I was living in then. So there is this problem gap of what people deserve. And I don't want that to come off as pompous or bad, but I think the expectation of quality of housing has risen dramatically. And so the fact that there's 15 million vacant houses, so like one, there's still a big opportunity for flippers, developers to go buy those vacants, fix them, make them brand new. Now, part of the reason there's so many vacants is because there's age of the properties.
This is like downtown Oakland, Detroit, like places that are less desirable and older.
I think houses built between 1970 and 1990, right? There's tons of those, right? There's tons of second homes and third homes and things like that people have too. But it's that older stock of housing that it's like, so we have the shortage. What will cause a shortage? Technology or business saying, hey, here's a neighborhood full of empty houses. We can invest in this and really replace it. The other thing that's going to happen is cities saying, hey, you could put 3 houses on a lot instead of 2. In California, they said, hey, you can build ADU units in your backyard and, no questions asked, and you get your permit within 30 days. So there is some like government intervention. People are trying to create extra housing units, but like an ADU in a backyard in California, most of them are not getting turned into housing.
No, right.
Yeah. Most people aren't renting out their ADU in the back. Now they have a cool home office that they weren't able to get permitted before, and now they're just excited they can put a second unit on the back. Now, some people might rent it and Airbnb it, but Airbnb isn't housing either. So there is a shortage in housing. Technology will change that. City intervention will start to change that, or just the idea of, I also think that if economy does get bad enough, that then people say, hey, I would rather have a house than no house. And so there is actually a bunch of houses that are available for rent. They just aren't as nice as the one I wanted. So it's but I think so often people will go into them and go like, no, I deserve something better.
Something I predicted a few years ago on the other end of it. So that's like to your point, technology can go from 1 million homes built a year to 2 million. You just close the gap, whatever that, you would know those numbers better than anybody. And that's great. So you start to catch up supply with demand. And that's an interesting, I didn't know about the 15 million vacant homes. But something I called a couple of years ago, actually in my GoBundance pod, because somebody was like, prices can't go up forever. I'm like, sure they can. It's called the 40 and the 50-year mortgage. So 3-4 years ago, I went through this whole exercise of explaining like, well, it doesn't even show like that big a difference in your monthly payment, but a couple $100 a month could be the difference between buying a $600,000 home or not buying a home, right? So in the 70s, the 30-year mortgage was built in a time of high inflation in order for people to buy houses and afford them. It went from typically a 15-year mortgage to this introductory product, short term, of a 30-year. And then, of course, like any government program, it became mainstream. It just never went away. From the 70s to today, we live longer. right? So 30, 40 years or 50 years makes sense. We're in a high inflation environment. Housing is very expensive. People don't buy houses on full price. They buy houses on what they can afford monthly.
Absolutely. They only care about the payment. They don't care what the sales price.
So we're seeing the 40 and 50-year mortgage. Does that, I don't know if Fannie's going to back that, because if they do, I don't think they are right now. I don't think Fannie and Freddie buy 40 and 50-year, do they?
No, there's talk of Freddie buying 40 years, but right now they don't. Right now, as far as I know, the 30 it's 30. It's all secondary.
30 or less. So if they end up buying 40-year mortgages, that fuels the 40-year mortgage economy, maybe the 50-year mortgage economy for that matter. Does that not offset the technology advancement, or 3 units versus 2 on one lot? Does that not start to offset, like, by creating even more demand for housing? Like, is it ever ending?
So will there ever be a demand to housing? No. Right? Like, so there's no end of the demand, because people are moving here and people are coming. And it's just like the products can be adjusted to make it quicker and more affordable. But yes, because any adjustment that they're going to make now, right? Because even if rates go a little bit higher, right, it's still going to make it to where the amount of housing stock that's out there is going to get sold, right? Is going to get rented. Interest only loans were a big thing too. And I do remember in like 2006, 2007 going to a seminar, and a guy's like, hey, like, what's better, a 15-year mortgage or a 30? And he's like, a 30 because you can make the payment, but you can always pay it off quicker if you want. Well, what's better, a 40 or a 30? Well, a 40 because you can always make the payment, but you can pay it off earlier if you want. And it goes like, what's 100 years? And that's an interest-only loan. And so getting to more of the interest-only loans, I think that keeps it to where people can buy. There's this struggle between the idea of people like, we don't want houses to go, they don't want prices to go up any higher,
right?
But they want everybody to be able to buy a home.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if you create products that allows everybody to be able to buy a home, whether they're qualified or not, regardless of their income, regardless of their down payment, by doing that and creating that product, then prices, you can't have both. You can't have like everybody's able to buy a house and they're cheap. If you're going to make it to where homeownership is attainable to everybody, then the price is going to go up because of demand. There's the NAR commission stuff that'll probably have some short-term changes to what happens with like sales prices and price of housing and things like that. But yeah, I think in the long term, what we should expect everywhere when it comes to housing is you look at that chart of what did prices do over the last 20 years, and that's the line that we're going to see forever.
Yeah. A couple of quick asides. People ask me all the time about, hey, I want to invest down where you are in the Dominican Republic. You think there's a crash coming? I'm like, sure. Yeah. There's always a crash coming. Like, are you talking about investing for a year or two and flipping it? Like, that's kind of like getting short-term debt. Like, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
2 years, it could go up, could go down. Look at any chart. But if you're talking about investing for the next 10 or 20, to your point, I'm reasonably sure that the price will be higher than it is today. So if you're looking for the long term, it'll work. And it's the same thing. There's 2 different directions I want to go on this, but one, I want to, like, on the what causes it all to stop. So you mentioned about some of the population dynamics. There's a lot of immigration, illegal and legal, but there's still 1 million plus legal immigrants that come here every year, right? The millennial generation is online looking for homes, and that is a blip that we have that most other countries don't, as far as another boom of a generation as far as population. You have the baby boomers, then it retracted down to like the Gen Xers, then the millennials kind of pop up, and then it's like we have a slowing birth rate otherwise. But with immigration and all of that, we have increasing demand. At the same time, does BRICS potentially end the party in the United States as immigration stop, because BRICS takes the dollar and the dollar is no longer the reserve currency, and that changes all of these dynamics. I've heard one CIA guy said 2030 that's absolutely going to happen. What do you think?
Dude, that's fascinating.
We're getting into it.
We are getting into it. I tell people, so I do a lot of stuff for the short term. I do a lot because usually if the market's on fire and that this is like January 2021, the example we talked about last time.
Yeah.
Like I was 100% certain that bet was going to pay off really, really fast. So usually when the market's on fire, you can just tell, hey, is this a good investment? Is it going to be like this 3 months from now? Is it going to be like this 6 months from now? And even when it started to turn off and the music started to stop, it was slow, right? We saw the rate just start to go up just a little bit.
Yep.
And the rate started to go up a little bit. And I was like, sell your stuff, right? But it was gradual. It was like a 9-month process between we got that first news to where it was like starting to get bad. So markets and trends are usually pretty predictable. Now, I also try to look at and back to like the BRICS dollar and how, I don't bet on it or play on it, but here's why. So people ask me why I don't build a bunker, right? Do you think there's a chance we're ever going to need a bunker because the world's going to get taken over because whatever? And then I go, I think there's a chance of that. Right. And they're like, well, why won't you go buy 20 acres somewhere and have your place that you run off to
and whatever, right?
Just in case. Right. And I go, because I think there will be more signs. I think 3 or 4 months before that happens, it's not going to be too late. And there's going to be a lot more signs of that. Right. So meaning like, yes, if we're like, could all of a sudden something crazy happen? Yes, but I don't think we're there yet. And I think that everything does seem to be very predictable, and we get all these other signs. So I'm not going to build a bunker now. I'm going to build a bunker when I know it's imminent. And then I might pay more for my bunker at the time.
Sure.
And I might pay more for guns and ammo and all those things that people are doing right now. But I know I won't be 5 years early, and I know I won't be 10 years early. And so with any of the 2030 type predictions, and also ones that, like, if they're so wild, I wouldn't even know what to predict, what to do, and I try to go, I want to figure out what the rules of the game are. The rules of the game are like, here's what interest rates are, or here's what people can buy for, or I can buy a lot for this, and this is how much it costs me. I'm going to find out the rules of the game, and I'm going to figure out how to make money within those rules of the game, how to succeed within those rules. So I'd be really curious to get to, talk to that CIA guy, or you should have him on the podcast so I can learn more about that side of it. Like, I think... So let's go back to like 2007, 2008. Like, what made the market really stop then? Well, they started raising rates normally because the housing market was on fire.
Yep.
And then people at that time had a bunch of 3 and 5 year interest only adjustable rate mortgages. The rates got adjusted, and your monthly payment went from like $3,000 a month to $6,000 a month
because prices stopped.
Yeah,
because
prices stopped, and so it was like, no, you're going to be able to refi. No, you're going to be able to sell out of it. But when your mortgage payment gets moved from $3,000 a month to $6,000 a month, which is what happened on those ARMs, then they're like, oh, screw it, and I don't have equity in my house anymore, and people started mass walking away from the properties. That was the craziest perfect storm you could imagine. That lowered housing demand for about 3 years. Mm-hmm. And then by 2012, 2013, it was higher than it was before.
Yeah.
And that was catastrophic.
Yeah.
Like catastrophic, unimaginable, never happened in a lifetime, killed demand for 3 years. And 4 years later, it was right back. $700,000 houses in California were trading for $200,000. And I said, they'll never be worth $700,000 again. Like homes that we were building as home builders.
Yeah.
They went from 7 to 200, are now worth $1 million. Right. So, yeah, I think that there could be blips that cause the music to stop.
Sure.
But like 2 year plan right now, I don't see anything that's going to create a big crash in the next year or two. I think there are, I think it's just kind of business as usual, other than the big fallout of some more commercial, more adjustable, more things that I think will go wrong in the next 6 months.
Let's talk about something that went wrong recently. Philadelphia-based Republic First Bank collapses in first bank failure of 2024. Sign of things to come?
The last year there was a lot of collapses in 2023. I don't remember what the chart was, but 2023 was a big blip on the collapse. Does it say what made it's like CMB loans or?
Yeah. Commercial loans were a factor in it. I just had it up.
So it's fine. So what I would say, I didn't study too much of that one, but I saw the failures last year and some that they think are happening. And there's a lot of small banks being bought right now from each other.
That's actually what happened. The FDIC intervened and immediately sold it to another bank.
Yep. So they're finding who to sell them to. There are a lot of smaller banks that we were getting loans from a year ago for small development because they were the only, where you went to a year or two ago was you went to the local only bank. And you went to the local only bank because they were going to give you the better terms. I had a line of credit with a bank for like 6 years. They'd always renewed it every year. And last year, I guess 14 months ago now, they just said, hey, we're not renewing any lines of credit. And so the sign of things to come was they were overextended on all of their stuff and they could no longer do loans. So they were, I think, were pulling. So I will not be surprised if that bank goes under, right? And I've had two other banks recently say we're not extending loans anymore. And again, when it took time to refinance a normal line of credit that I've had for years and years and years, I'm a good borrower. They said no, we're not renewing lines of credit. And we have another one that we've had for 9 years out of a bank that's in both California and Oregon. We've been members there forever, had a line of credit for 9 years. Last month, it went to expire. This is the first time. And last time we went to renew it, they're like, let's not do it every year again. Let's do 3. This time, no talk of renewal. No offer of renewal. It's like, hey, pay us back. And we're getting notices every day of like, can you pay that back yet? So I think a lot of the smaller banks are overextended. So as a sign of the times, yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of the smaller banks sell assets to each other. There's too much commercial debt that's been getting lent on that is upside down. Like even the storage unit that I own, that I built a couple years ago, I'm like $1.5 million upside down on that thing.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not cash flowing. I'm losing like 10 grand a month. It pisses me off. Like I hired the wrong operators to build it. The guys that I trusted, I should have taken more ownership ahead of time on it. So I'm $1.5 million upside down, and I'm paying $10,000 a month into it. Now I had a big tax write-off when I bought it, but a lot of guys aren't going to pay $10,000 a month into an asset that's $1.5 million upside down inevitably.
Right.
Right. I'll do it forever.
Yeah.
Right. But because I have credit and I need credit and I've got enough assets to balance it out. But your average person, that's going under. And if a guy like me, that's super like I'm gonna pat myself. I'm super freaking smart with my commercial real estate developments. Like I do things that look like home runs that have, and I had millions of dollars worth of equity when I first built it, right? And if guys like me can be caught like that, like guys that don't have the money for it, they're gonna lose a lot more properties. And a loan like that, small Michigan bank, right? So small Michigan bank, they're loaned to a bunch of people like us, but they probably do 40 or 50 loans like that a year.
Yeah.
Right. And if they have 20 or 30 of the people that are upside down, which probably they are, like that's the sort of thing that if they have to start foreclosing on some, that bank goes under.
Unless you're deposited in that bank, if you're just hearing the news for the average person, average investor or whatever, you just kind of shrug your shoulders and move on. Yeah, it's just what the market's doing. Or is there something that we should be worried about or an action that would be smart to take? Like, what do you do with this news?
Yeah, that's it. So some people have, commercial-backed mortgages or things that most retirement funds are invested in. Most are trying to pull out of them, right? They talk about the teachers unions and the fire department unions stuff. A lot of those guys are invest in commercial assets. Like the most common, like stock asset is a commercial backed security, right? Because they were paying higher rates. So that was like part of a fund that was on average giving you like 6 to 8%, really, really stable. Life insurance policies like Ackman Ziff and those guys, they were given 3 and 4% loans as long as it was at least a $50 million balance. So life insurance policies, I haven't heard of a life insurance policy company going under, but those are the companies that could go under, right? Because they're backed by commercial too on these really, really low rates because they have to put their cash somewhere. I think in general, it just affects the stock market. And then could also affect your job. So depending on like what your job is and what service you do, like people that were providing, people that were building desks at offices are not doing as well this year as they were doing a few years ago.
Yeah.
And so there's got to be some commercial related industries that are really, really struggling, and that's where it could do. So I would say not a whole lot of action you could take, but you could review where your stocks are holding, where some of your savings is that way, and then try to figure out where the opportunity might be to repurpose or provide a service to those people that are hurting.
Grant Cardone said that he's buying commercial real estate like as much as he can get, not even multifamily, but like office. I asked him like downtown or San Francisco. He goes, downtown I'll buy right now, downtown LA, so on and so forth. Is that smart? Is he right? Are you in that same space? His logic being,
Yeah. So I bet the reality is he's probably buying buildings that were $50 million 5 years ago for $10 million.
He's buying for a third or less the cost per square foot.
Right. Giant article like a couple weeks ago, building that was in the hundreds of millions that just foreclosed for $6 million. Went from hundreds of millions to 6. So no matter what, like I would buy, no, this actually isn't true anymore. I used to say I would buy anything for $1, right? So there's a price that someone is going to, but there was like a big empty office parking lot the other day that me and Laver drove by, and he's like, would you want to own that even for $1? Right?
You said
we were
no.
like, no. Because of the amount of work that it was going to take to put people in there, not being able to imagine when they would get in there, the amount of interest carry we would have until we started cash flowing, and just the property taxes. Mm-hmm. And so it was starting to go like, so no, now there probably are some, now there isn't, there are very few houses that I would say no to with that. But now there is this factor of there's some commercial that no one would want to buy. So it's like, I guarantee that yes, if you've got the money to buy distressed commercial real estate at pennies on the dollar, there are some amazing Class A properties right now that are selling for fractions of it that you only need 20% occupied. There was this beautiful one in Dallas that went for like $20 or $30 a foot, and it was a Class A. You walk into the entryway and it's like 100-foot, entryway, big, beautiful building. And so there are like a business could own one of those. So there is a need for the stuff at the new prices if they're cash flowing at like 20% vacant.
Is there right now, so I go to San Francisco, even in Austin, I think there's a lot of vacancy in Austin as well, right? As far as office vacancy. But are we not feeling or seeing the collapse because there's still leases in place that are being paid down? Like I know there's physical vacancy, but is there is there way less economic vacancy in these buildings right now, or are they in full distress?
WeWork has put a lot of people in distress. Like WeWork filing bankruptcy and not paying any of their stuff anymore. Most of the buildings that WeWork was a major tenant in, they were the biggest tenant. And they're still taking up space. They're still allowed to be in there, but they're not paying any bills.
Oh, no shit. Oh, wow.
Right. You file bankruptcy and you don't have to pay your bills.
Yeah, I know, but I think they would have to at least vacate the property.
There's different instructions that come in, but then they try to look at each of the assets and go, the creditors, when you're in bankruptcy, you have time to figure it out.
Yeah.
So if someone's going to foreclose on your house and you file bankruptcy, you pretty much have like 9 months to figure out if you got a better plan or not. It doesn't mean you have to move out, but it mostly just buys time. But if you're a guy that owns a big commercial building and your biggest tenant isn't going to pay you for the next 9 months, you don't have any way to buy time unless you file bankruptcy yourself. A lot of the big owners, like some of the biggest vacancy is like I think it's the Meta building, that Facebook built and never occupied. There's a lot of big companies down here, Google, Meta, those that have, vacancy in their buildings.
But that's
the building that I'm in is only 20% occupied.
Yeah.
Right. As a commercial office. So I would say, I think for anybody that bought office in the last 3 or 4 years, I think they are in a lot of trouble. I think they're upside down and they're having to make the same question that I'm doing about my Michigan storage unit. To go like, do I keep paying in $10,000 a month on this? And when is it going to change? And when is it going to go the other way? And there's also people that have really, really good morals and really, really good intentions that eventually run out of money.
Yeah.
That go like, they're going to keep paying the bill until next month. They're like, I don't know how to pay.
Right.
There's no one else I can borrow from or do that. So I think it's bad. I think the vacancy in Austin is one of the highest. And Austin is one of the most amazing downtown cities around. So like it makes sense to me why San Francisco is hurting for a vacancy, right? And some of those other big cities or cities that aren't as great. Like Austin is still big and booming, but the one thing is there's a lot of vacancy and it's a little bit overbuilt. And if you go outside, you're going to see 15 cranes in the air of new towers getting built still.
I guess I'm trying to figure out, have we hit a peak or a low in the commercial? Are we at the low for commercial real estate? It's supposed to be around now. Everybody predicted mid 2024. And if we are, is this what it feels like? In other words, if you think of the news and the headlines from a year ago, like fuck, blood in the streets, man, watch what's coming. And you're actually like picturing fires and helicopters and, like guys in tactical gear on the streets. Like you kind of have that image of it, but is this the feeling? Like there's certain people that are really feeling it right now. But like day by day, the sun rises, the sun goes down. It is what it is. The building's trading. Some guys are getting out of it. They're getting back to even. Whew, thank God I did. Other people are just writing off the loss. I know I've had to on a couple of different multifamily deals I've been in. Is that it? Is this the bottom? Are we feeling it right now?
Yeah, I think the good news is your other question is like, what does the average person do?
Yeah.
For the average person, this is what it feels like. So could some of the amenities we like, my daughter the other day goes, oh my God, my favorite coffee shop just filed bankruptcy and it's closed and the doors were closed and none of the workers got paid. That's right. A few blocks from here.
Yeah.
But they're nationwide. They've got like 30 or 40 spots. And so it's like, that's one of the things that happens, right? Is like one day, like, so what does that affect? Like, well, it doesn't really affect us that much. Like she has to go get coffee somewhere else. But like for the people that were working there, they're not going to get paid the last few weeks. But those are mostly blips. I think that like we think about the residential crisis of like 2009 and there was literally like people piling into hotel rooms. There was crisis. There was suicide. It felt a lot more crazy and panicking. And there were people jumping off buildings in New York, right? Like it was bad. I think there are the people that the big commercial developers that when they're losing right now, there is devastation. I think there are some offices that if we walked into the look on their face and the panic that they have is different. For 99% of the population, this is what it looks like.
That's it.
I don't think the commercial stuff affects that many. And are we at the bottom? Yes, I think that you could probably, now, not if it's like, here's what it's listed for. But I think that people that are able to buy commercial for a deal today because sellers are needing to sell, I think people that buy today at a heavily discounted price can get it for the lowest it'll ever be. And especially like being able to even tie up some contracts that might not close until January of next year. You might be able to tie something up for the lowest it's ever going to be and then see a change in administration, see a way to, by next year to be able to do full accelerated depreciation again and see some really big upside. So I do think it's the bottom of what pricing. I think you can buy a deal today that'll never be cheaper.
Yep.
But it won't be for list price. It won't be for the one that's out there. And if you go just buy what somebody's asking for and you aren't a good operator, you don't hire the right operator, then you could still be in trouble. later.
Really interesting. This is what bottom feels like.
Yeah.
This is it.
In commercial, yeah.
In commercial.
I think this is what the bottom
To your
feels like.
point, residential is like homes, people living, and then, all
If you and I were commercial developers, it's a very different conversation, because the ones that are calling us for bailouts and the ones that are calling us to say like, hey, take this over, there is panic and there is stress.
Sure.
And there is, and it's intense.
Yeah.
But there aren't a whole lot of commercial developers out there.
I'm impact. Like I said, there's some deals that I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm not going
We
to.
know a lot of friends are getting screwed in syndications,
100%,
right? And the reason and some of them, for some people it's no big deal. I put $100,000 in that and I'm not getting it back. I'm sad. I'm bummed. I would have bought a new car.
But my day is going to go on.
But my day is going to go on.
Right.
There are some other people invested in those same syndications that was the only $100,000 they had because their other business has now failed. They thought it was a savings account. They couldn't wait till they got that money out of it. Like they needed it for this other loan they were going to pay off. And there is devastation. And so when you get into commercial, it's just that higher, there's fewer people, but it is that higher number.
Crazy. Well, it's interesting. Like I said, I remember when what was it, like 600 units in Houston went into foreclosure, and the guy like left the country. I can't remember. You heard that story. It's the beginning. It starts, and it does like the saber rattling and the handshaking. It feels like, oh my God. And to your point, it's not to minimize those that are going through this right now. Somebody listening to this going through it, but for most of us, I think it's like you said, like, that sucks. I just lost 50 grand. Like, it was for a future thing. I was hoping it would turn out right, but
we've got more commercial foreclosures scheduled in Tarrant County just this next month. I'll pull it up really quick while we're talking.
Yeah.
So the guy from the Dallas Business Journal said, "Hey, I want some information about this deal. What's happening on these deals?" And he goes, "And anything else happening in Tarrant County?" And I'm just going to read them to you really quick of just the examples of stuff that we're seeing on there. So the guy, I emailed the guy back from the Business Journal, and I said, so here's what we've got. We've got a $40 million loan for a big building in Dallas going to sale. So $40 million in debt, probably going to sell for $15 million. $12 million Woodhaven Country Club, a $13.8 million apartment complex, $12.5 million Hilton Garden Hotel, another $32 million apartment complex, a former bank building with a drive-through, $13 million, a $40 million apartment, a $21 million apartment. As far as like quantity of like buildings over $10 million scheduled for auction, and some of these are crazy. Like when you start to look at like some of the images on these things, as you click on, just a great big newly renovated office building, $40 million in $40 million note, which means they bought it for 60 and it's gonna sell for 20.
Yeah.
Right, so it's a 70% decline in rates, and that was just like one county in Texas next week.
Wow, man.
Right, and that we haven't seen that many in come down in a month in one of those counties in a while. So
we're in it. We're in it.
So
right now.
So we're in it. Like we'll see more foreclosures.
Yeah.
But the pricing doesn't get much worse. And I hate to say this, but yeah, I don't think the fallout gets much worse. I think this is just what it feels like.
NAR, this big lawsuit. Keller Williams is paying out billions. All the big
everybody is
paying out billions, right? So, if you could just real quick recap recap the principles of what that settlement, what that case was. And you said on an Emerge call recently, like this is the end of the real estate agent, essentially, in some ways, right? Like end
of the buyer's agent.
End of the buyer's agent.
Really funny. A guy in that call commented, "You're wrong," and then he came to my Real Estate Rockstars mastermind like 3 weeks later and introduced himself. Today he's actually leading our call to our Real Estate Rockstar group, and then when the news came out, he goes, "You were right."
Yeah, no kidding. I know him. VC, we'll call him. VC.
Yeah, he's running a meetup call for our group right now. It was great to be able to meet him, and it was great that he came up and said, "Hey, I was the guy that told you were wrong." All right. So what happened? So there was a lawsuit that came out that was essentially a class action that said to attack the realtor associations that by price fixing commissions, you've artificially increased home values, and so we've had to pay more than we should, and we should get that money back, right? And so that theory, and so where does it come back to? All right, when somebody sells a house, there's either a 4%, 5%, or 6% commission that is split in some fashion between the listing agent and the buyer's agent. And buyer's agents, we taught them this on our podcast. You would go represent a buyer, and they would say, "I'm interested in this house." And they go, "Well, how much do I pay?" You go, "Don't worry, you don't pay me at all. I work for you for free." The seller ends up paying me. Cool. This is how it works. Oh, I don't have to pay you anything? Cool. I'll sign up. And then people are saying, "But I didn't realize after that that you were getting paid so much." Like then they go to the closing table. They're like, "Wait, my agent got paid $20,000 for this, and my down payment's $20,000." And then the other thing they said is like they didn't believe that maybe they could have gotten a discount if they would have agreed to negotiate buyer commissions. And then the people that wanted to put their head in the sand said, this lawsuit's not going to go through. I watched the hearings. We talked about it on the podcast. We said they're going to win. We said whether we like it or not, whether it's fair or not, it's a totally legal, valid argument. And so it's like, what do you mean? As listing agents, we would have people come to us and say, hey, I don't have a buyer's agent. Can I get 3% off?
No,
well, we would say yes.
Oh, you would?
Yeah. As a seller, we didn't care. Right?
No kidding.
As a seller, you care about your net.
I used to hear, real quick, I used to hear from, and I'm not an agent, so tell me where maybe this is. I used to hear from people like, I don't discount my rate. I provide that level of service. It's 6%.
Oh, fair. So the now the listing, so there are listing agents that if a buyer comes to them and says that, the listing agent would tell the buyer, no, you have to pay full price. And this is part of where the lawsuit comes in too. Because yes, they would say, no, I'm not negotiating that. But they didn't tell the seller, hey, there's a buyer here that's willing to pay $97,000 instead of $100,000, but he doesn't have an agent. And if you cut my commission in half, they can have it. Right? So that's part of why the lawsuit's valid, because people would be like, no, and they wouldn't bring it to the seller as that. But when we would have, but the benefit of most of the time we ever listed houses, we either did flat rate listings, or it was like we knew the agents were part of our company. So they didn't care if there was a buyer's agent or not. Like they weren't going to get paid extra if people had it or not. They'd go, hey, this person wants a 3% discount. They don't have an agent. Cool. We'd say yes to it.
So if you were dual agency, you would say yes to 3%.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So the and so the like that's long story short is the legal argument was valid and the Realtor Association NAR did a whole bunch of things in 2020, 2021 to try to really they made wholesaling essentially illegal if you were a realtor. Like if you had a pocket listing, these other guys were trying to create like pocketlisting.com. They said, no, you are not allowed to have a pocket listing. If you have an ability to listing, it has to go on MLS, which in the next 3 days, and to make sure that then if it goes on MLS, you have to put the buyer's agent commission. So they did a bunch of things in 2020 and 2021 to try to extend their monopoly, and then they got caught. So then lawsuit came out, said that's true. You can no longer have the seller can no longer be required to pay the buyer agent commissions. Like what's the most recent change that are coming at us with the settlement? This is the settlement if the DOJ approves. So it used to be that like you could do the pitch to the buyer, like I said, and now what that pitch is going to be like, hey, here's the deal, Mr. Buyer. This is what I do for. They could say, hey, I'm going to show you houses for $500. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this for you. But maybe the seller's going to pay me back when you end up buying a house, right? Or they're going to say, hey, I charge you $5,000 a flat rate to represent you, but there's a good chance that when we go buy this, we'll be able to negotiate with the seller. But now it's actually going to be on the contract because the contract's going to say, I'm buying the house for $200,000, but the seller's also going to pay 3% to my agent. Before, the sellers didn't see that negotiation between the buyer and the seller when they were trying to negotiate commission. We still get emails from agents that'll say like, hey, I want to show this house, but only if you pay me 3.5% commission. Right? And they're like, and I'm like, cool, let's tell your buyer that.
Yeah.
Let's tell your buyer that they want to see this house and that you're not going to show them unless I pay you 1 point extra. So it's definitely going to change the industry. It's going to change it to where buyer's agents have less incentive to become buyer's agents because it's going to be a lot harder to get somebody who doesn't have any money to pay you $5,000 to go represent them. So the listing agent isn't dead though. I just think a lot of listing agents are going to represent both sides. I think there's going to be some technology that's going to keep driving commission rates down. I think in the next few years, like total commissions will be between 2 and 3% on a transaction. Most people won't have buyer's agents. One thing that might change that is like, so, lenders could have a chance of doing it. Like the example, a VA loan.
What do you mean? Yeah.
If you get a loan, if you buy a house for $100,000, your VA loan amount ends up being like $107.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's because you're in the military, down payment assistance, no money down. So there is a way to have a loan be more than the appraised value.
Yep.
So Fannie Freddie could get on board and say, hey, we will let buyers add up to 3% of the loan value for commission to be paid out of the loan. So if they're buying a $100,000 house, the loan can end up being $103,000. But usually those loans are like already like a 3% down. So they could say, hey, instead of it being a 3% down payment, or instead of the loan being 90% of value, it could be 100% of value or something. So lenders do have the ability to actually fix that to where buyers could have their buyer agency paid.
Yeah.
Meaning, so I think there will be some lenders that will actually create that product that will help change it. That could help represent it for a little bit. But it just gets to be like, what's a normal buyer going to do when an agent says, hey, you can pay me to show it? They're just going to call the listing agent. When I go to a brand new city and I see a listing and I want to try to get information on it, I just call the listing agent direct. and I'm going to say I don't have I'm coming in unrepresented.
Yeah.
And so and I just know that when I make my offer, the seller's going to have to think like, oh, we're not paying their agent 3%, so we can get a discount on it.
Is there any impact on MLS?
Yes. So the only reason that people have MLS is because the only difference that MLS had compared to Zillow or Realtor.com is they had confidential agent remarks and how much the buyer agent commission was. And now it's illegal to actually say on MLS so you can't say on MLS anymore, sellers paying 1%, 2%, 3%. You cannot have that on MLS anymore starting July 1st. So you can't even offer a buyer's agent commission on there. Now, again, in theory, a buyer could write an offer and say, but the seller is going to pay 3% to my agent or 2% to my agent. But MLS only had that extra value because now Realtor.com, Redfin, Zillow all have that same information. So I think there's going to be a big incentive for people just to leave the MLS and just pay Zillow to list their property instead. Most people are seeing it on Zillow.
So does that decentralize?
It is. I think it's great if they do it. I mean, other than Zillow becomes Zillow's the king of the space, right? So right now we list our houses on Zillow only for rent.
Okay, let me play this out before you get, because first of all, I want to we have like 5-6 minutes to let you out. But and this is a perspective I'm gaining from shopping real estate in another country right now.
Yeah.
So Dominican Republic, you don't do a buyer's agent. It's kind of acts like commercial. You just go right to the seller, the seller's agent, and that's it. You pay 4 or 5, whatever the commission percentage is. There's very little dual agency. You just kind of deal with the person that you're dealing with most of the time. There is not an MLS. There's not a centralized service of any kind there. So I could literally walk into a neighborhood with a broker, and he's like, this is the house for sale in this neighborhood. It's incredible. And I look at it, I'm like, okay, this is
like
really
1980.
Nice. Yeah. But then I could go to another broker, another realtor, and say, yeah, I already visited this neighborhood with so-and-so. Oh, well, this house is for sale. Like, oh, that's next door to the house I looked at yesterday. But seller agent A doesn't know about seller agent B's property sitting next door, unless there's maybe a sign in front of it. Are we going toward that?
Yeah. Well, no, because we have technology.
Well, they have technology, but they're. Go ahead. I want to hear that.
So that's like pocket listings is what they're trying to do. They're trying to say like, hey, and it could just be like a legal thing of people aren't necessarily signing listing agreements. They don't want to just deal with one agent.
Yeah.
And so they're saying, hey, my house is for sale, but agents don't want to. They're not going to put it out there because the agent wants to represent. So I could see how that happened.
They put it on their site, on their own broker site.
Yeah.
It's not centralized anywhere. Like you have to go to every broker.
Their worry is probably because if it's on that site, then that first broker that showed you the first house could actually just show you the second house and cut out the other guy. If they're not used to 2 agents on every transaction, then the agent's going to protect whatever info that he has. So I didn't know that about down there. That's really interesting. But it must just be because they don't have essentially listing agreements. Like a listing agreement says, if this house sells, this agent's going to get paid no matter what.
I think they do. But I don't know the space enough. Like I have one friend that's an agent there.
They're not on Zillow. They don't post their sales on Zillow.
No Zillow. So Zillow, no Redfin, nothing like that.
All right, big opportunity down there.
Well, there's somebody trying to develop it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It would not be. So if you could actually get to the core issue of culturally why they do it, there's a technology that could make that better that everybody would like and everybody could benefit from. Yeah, I think it ends up going to place. I think what we'll end up seeing is like right now we list our rentals on Zillow for like $7 a day or $7 a week.
Yeah.
Right. I could see agents just doing that instead of paying their realtor fees, instead of being a part of that, because then even on Zillow, they could say extra things like, well, the seller will still pay a buyer's agent commission and things like that, because you can control what the comments are. Downside is what Zillow is going to try to get to later is not like contact the agent. It's going to be a make offer, and it's going to say how much do you want to offer. Submit your loan docs, do this, like, so that they will start cutting out the buyer's agents. And then even showings, like we use these cool lock boxes for our showings for rentals. Like we show houses every day in McGregor, and I have no employees up there. Right, we have these vacant houses that people show up at the door, and it says they can see it right then. They have to upload their credit card and driver's license, and it gives them a one-time use code, and they walk into the house. Mm-hmm. That's what I think that's going to be.
Seller's agent.
A lot of future listing agents will still exist because they're going to want somebody to do the paperwork in the middle, but the price will come down more and more because the negotiation will be more direct.
And you see a potential blip in bringing pricing of housing down as a result.
Yeah. And a short-term blip overall, like it will definitely make it to where right now to sell a house, you've got like 8 to 9% fees.
Yeah.
You've got your commissions, you've got your closing costs, you've got all sorts of different things that come into it. As title and escrow gets cheaper, as commissions come down, if you can start to sell your house for 3% instead of 8%, like it will bring, like, I care about my net, right? Like I just need to sell the house, and sometimes it's like I owe $100,000 on it. If I can get $100,000 back, I'm going to sell it. those are the examples where prices will match. I can't sell it for 98 because I'm upside down. I don't have $2,000.
Yeah.
But I can sell it for 100. But if I could do 8% commission, if I have 3% fees instead of 8, now I could sell it. So, but that blip will average out. Just like even if rates just stay at 7% forever, this blip will be corrected and eventually it goes up. So we will see a blip. It won't be a long-term blip.
What is the when is this codified? Like so if I wanted to sell my house today and I'm going to pay 8% in total fees for this, like what do I wait to so that I only have to pay 3 or 4%?
Yeah. So July 1st, it makes it official to where they can't do that stuff anymore. They're still going to be trying to offer. I bet there's going to be lots of little violations. And then during those violations, people will start to get, because some people are like, oh, then I'm just going to go in and write my offers this way. But I think, again, when sellers see it too, like one thing is the buyers were like, hey, we didn't realize that we could have gone in unrepresented and get a better deal. Sellers also didn't realize that there were so many buyers that were willing to forego commission. I mean, because sometimes what the buyers would say was like, hey, let's both cut our commission. Right. And the listing agent's like, no, I'm not going to cut my commission. I don't have to. But now the sellers are actually going to be able to see that communication. And so when this buyers and sellers can both see the commission negotiations, like these middlemen of the agents, I love real estate agents, right? Yeah. But there are plenty of bad real estate agents where those middlemen of the agents were not acting in the buyer seller's best interest. They were just acting for their commission.
Yeah.
Right. They're like, no, I'm not going to tell the seller that because I want my commission. I'm not going to tell the seller you're going to discount yours or they're going to make me discount mine. So yeah, we'll see. It'll be a lot to come.
Have you been hated on some of this for some of this stuff? Have you
it's funny too. Like I get a lot of hate. I get a lot of comments of like, "What's your deal? Why do you keep doing this?" And then it all comes out in the wash. And usually a few months later, they go, "Oh,
you know what Ayala says about you?
What's he saying?
You predicted 19 of the last 3 recessions."
Yes, that's Mikey's. That is some of the being a dark cloud guy. Like but I think I haven't been as it's not that dramatic, but it is a funny prediction.
When you read and listen, it might come across like this dude is doom and gloom.
Yeah,
but really, when you I should say when you read, but when you listen to you, it's a very matter of fact. Data-driven sort of
that I wish was wrong.
Right. Exactly.
Most of the news this year, I've lost millions and millions of dollars in the last year, Jamie. Like I am hurting and some of my real estate assets harder than I ever have before.
Yeah.
And so I'm the first person to say, I absolutely would love it if the Fed dropped rates.
Yeah.
I would absolutely love it if they'd have done 5 rate cuts this year. It would have saved me millions of dollars probably on some assets I was trying to trade.
Yeah.
So I don't say this because for anything else. It's just like my predictions, but then I do what I bet on. And if we had more time, I'd tell you about those bets, but I'll have to be next time.
Nah, have to be. I appreciate you, man. Where should people start searching? You got 2 podcasts now.
I got 2 podcasts. The Real Estate Rockstars is the one we've had forever for our real estate agents. The one that I have the most fun with. So Mike Ayala, Matt Aitchison, my buddies. We do the King's Table podcast.
Is there one more? Is it 4?
So we also have Ashish Nathu. So Ashish, it's so cool. So Ashish, old GoBundance member, he builds furniture in China. So he so like for all the biggest hotels that come out, he's the one providing their furniture. His industry's changed a lot. He ships stuff from China through Mexico. And there was a lot of interest about that. Yeah. Mike Ayala builds and buys like mobile home developments and buys and sells HVAC companies. Matty Aitchison had done multifamily, had done hospitality. Now he's going big into commercial. And I'm the guy that's done everything, but I mostly stick with residential and interest rate stuff. So we all have these different perspectives. So that's the King's Table podcast. It's on YouTube where we have a lot of fun. It's also on all the podcast places now. Place I totally want people to come say hi is on Instagram, just like you. It's my favorite place to put out daily content. And I promise that when people are on there, like I am just trying to provide a lot of value. So.
Thank God now when I text you and start to spell your last name or text your name to somebody else, it auto fills for me.
Yeah.
Just trying to spell your last name, man, it's like hieroglyphics.
It is. Same thing happens if you go to Instagram though. If you type in Aaron and you get to the AMU, it's going to auto fill for you. So luckily there aren't a whole lot of Aaron Amu anything. So you get to Aaron AMU, it's going to find me. So it's pretty lucky.
I appreciate you coming in.
All right. Thanks dude.
Brother. Yeah, of course.
All right. Good seeing you again.
Yeah.